Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Geek and Dorks Reviews. I'm John Lorden, and today we're going to talk about the film Team FoxCatcher. Now, you might have seen that there was a theatrical film, I believe it was just called FoxCatcher, that came out a few years ago, starring Steve Carell, Channing Tatum, and Mark Ruffalo. This is essentially a documentary about that same story, and I haven't seen the big Hollywood version of it yet, but from some internet searching that I did, it looks like they're catching a bit of flack for not being very accurate with the story. Team FoxCatcher is a straight-up documentary. It uses real footage, real interviews to retell the story. Which you would think would mean that it was more accurate. And some people online, particularly in the reviews for IMDB, do claim that it is a fairly accurate retelling of the story. However, I had this weird feeling when I was watching it. It was weird because I didn't remember, but I had actually seen a different documentary about this story before. And as I was watching it, I kept remembering this thing about a brother that just was not popping up in this version of the story. Now, just to give you a quick backstory on this, it's about a man named John DuPont. He is part of the very wealthy and famous DuPont family. You might know DuPont. The thing that always sticks in my mind is DuPont Stainmaster carpets, but they're responsible for creating a lot of things that are probably in use around your household. John DuPont was kind of raised with a lot of money. He was a young sibling. He had older siblings, but he didn't have a lot of other children his age, so he was raised sort of alone. He became extremely close to his mother and lived a little bit of what seems like a controlled and sheltered life, courtesy of his mother. So at some point in his life, he decides that he's going to help wrestling. He's essentially going to build a camp on his giant, sprawling mansion, and he's going to sponsor wrestlers and try to help America win some gold medals. And back at that time, wrestling was not supported a lot financially. The Olympic wrestlers could only work for a short period of time and then would typically have to go into other careers to support their family. And he wanted to change all that so that we could compete with the Eastern Bloc, primarily Russia, who was doing extremely well in wrestling because their wrestlers are supported and get monthly salaries and all that stuff. So it sounds very good-natured, and the documentary definitely takes you on that ride of really showing you some of the good, positive aspects of this man's life. However, it then turns into a bit of the darker side where he gets ultra fixated on certain people. And then ultimately, he does wind up killing pretty much his head coach that he has hired to help train and develop all these people. Now, I had this weird feeling while I was watching this version, Team FoxCatcher, which it says was released this year, 2016. You could find it on Netflix. But as I was watching it, because I had seen a documentary about it before, I was wondering, where's the brother? Because it was a very important component to the other documentary I saw was that the victim, Dave Shultz, had a brother, Mark Shultz, that was also part of this whole experience, living on the farm and going through that. And Team FoxCatcher pretty much completely cuts Mark out of the story. Now, I don't know if that was done because he didn't agree to participate in the story or something along those lines, but it is a huge omission if you've seen the other documentary. And I actually went today and found the other documentary because it was kind of driving me crazy. It was on an ESPN show called 30 for 30, and the name of the documentary is The Prince of Pennsylvania. Now, what's good about that documentary is it's less than an hour long. Team FoxCatcher is kind of done as a whole film, so it is 90 minutes long. Outside of the omission of Dave's brother, it also doesn't really go into the fact that John DuPont was married. His ex-wife is not interviewed for any of it. It really cuts her out of that whole story as well. And there are some things about the actual event of Dave being killed that are strikingly different between the two documentaries. I don't want to go into it too much here because I don't want to spoil it for you if you want to check it out. But I would highly recommend, if you watch Team FoxCatcher, to also watch The Prince of Pennsylvania. It's a bit harder to find. If you do some internet searches, you could probably dig it up. If I remember right, I think I saw it on Hulu last year. I think that's how I bumped into it. But actually, I guess this is kind of a review for both. Team FoxCatcher kind of loses itself in its filmmaking a little bit. There are parts of the story that really slow down. There's some good things about that because they spend more time, like I said, on the positive aspects. They also spend a lot more time in terms of what happens after the killing, when the police all of a sudden have to come on the land and there's essentially a standoff while they're trying to get John out of his mansion. So it's a bit more complete in terms of timeline, but I found the omission of the brother and John DuPont's ex-wife to be really harsh. Like it didn't sit well with me while I was watching it. I guess you could say that Team FoxCatcher is told through the victim, Dave's wife's perspective. The other one, The Prince of Pennsylvania, is certainly told by Dave's brother's perspective. So those are two very different perspectives. However, what's kind of cool about that is, as I mentioned, there's a few differences in the story, but there's also a lot of things that parallel, and it gives you a very complete picture, I think, of what was going on the grounds of this mansion, and especially as things kind of got dark and weird with John DuPont towards the end there. So there is almost two tragedies that are going on in Team FoxCatcher. You do have, of course, the shooting, which is tragic, and he's leaving two children behind, and that's all horrible, as well as a wife. But then you also have the tragedy of John DuPont. And one of the most touching moments, this is minor spoiler, one of the most touching moments for me is when Dave's daughter is actually making the comment about John DuPont and how he was also kind of misunderstood in his life. He was never really loved by anyone. And you get a sense of that very early on in the film. It's almost like this man was paying for friends in some way by building this Olympic wrestling organization on his mansion grounds and then inviting all these people to live there and work there. And it's just really, really sad. It kind of reminded me of Robert Durst from The Jinx. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I've done a Geek and Dorks review on it. I highly, highly recommend you check out The Jinx. But once again, it's about a man that comes from an extremely wealthy family, and both these documentaries kind of call out to the fact that a person's version of reality and their view of reality can become extremely distorted when they have a lot of money and power in their lives. And I think this is just another documentary that points towards that. So to finally sum it up, I think IMDB rates Team FoxCatcher, I think it's a 7.4 if I remember right, and they rate The Prince of Pennsylvania a 7.6. For me personally, I would knock a whole point of difference between these two documentaries. They are very, very different. I would say Team FoxCatcher is, I would say, a 6.5 for me, and The Prince of Pennsylvania, it just feels so much stronger to me. I'm actually going to make it more than a point. I'd say that's an 8 out of 10 for me. It's very to the point, it's very direct, it has a lot of information that Team FoxCatcher doesn't, despite the fact that Team FoxCatcher has an extra 40 minutes of content. But like I said, the filmmaker kind of gets lost a little bit in his storytelling mechanics, and that kind of pulls you away from the story at certain times. That definitely doesn't happen with The Prince of Pennsylvania. It is a compact 50-minute experience. You are given a ton of information very quickly, but not surprisingly, both of these films end on a very similar note. They just leave you with this sense of loss and tragedy for everyone that's involved in these situations. So I highly recommend that you learn more about this story. You can also check out the Wikipedia on John DuPont. There's also a Wikipedia on Dave Shultz. But outside of that, if you are going to watch one of these documentaries, I highly recommend you also watch the other. And by the time you're through both of those, you're probably going to have a fairly good grasp of what probably went down in this whole story. And it is tragic, high stakes, big money, and just it's almost like this guy was missing a piece of his heart. It really leaves you unsettled when you get to the end of this story. But anyway, that's it for this Geek and Dorks review. I hope you will check out this story, either of these documentaries, Team Foxcatcher or The Prince of Pennsylvania on 30 for 30 by ESPN. Very, very well done. And you have yourself a great week. I will catch you on the next show on the Geek and Dorks channel. Take care.